Today is my first 3-person episode. The topic is addiction, 12-step recovery, and spiritual growth. And I have with me today Liz Zinn and Allison Chamberlain-Jones. Allison co-created episode 5 and episode 11 with me. 5 was money, mindset, and spiritual wellness, entrepreneurship as a vehicle for spiritual growth. And episode 11 was the energetics of business, shifting from hustle to balance. And she is back with us for our 3rd Rooted Souls episode together. Welcome, Allison. She is a holistic business coach, astrologer, yoga instructor, and Reiki practitioner, and owner of Allison Jones Coaching, Astrology, and Wellness. She has been sober for almost 18 years and was participating in AA from 2004 to 2018. Definitely check out episodes 5 and 11 to learn more about her. And Liz has been with me since the beginning of Rooted Souls as my guest on episode 1, The Power of Music. She is a musician, owner of LZ Music Teaching Studio. She is also a performer and rising music therapist, currently working toward a dual master's degree in mental health counseling and music therapy at Lesley University. You can learn more about Liz on episode 1. Liz was sober in Alcoholics Anonymous from 2015 to 2019, leaving AA in early 2019, no longer identifying as an alcoholic. She and I had met in 2018 at one of the Al-Anon meetings that I had attended. I'd gone to 9 Al-Anon meetings in 7 days, and I was lucky enough to meet her at one Al-Anon meeting she had attended that year. I did attend a single AA meeting with Liz to receive her 3-year medallion, but my experience of AA and Al-Anon began because I was in a crumbling relationship with an alcoholic who had severe mental health challenges. At the time, I was feeling so disoriented and I was suffering and I was just looking for answers. And someone suggested I go to Al-Anon. I'd never heard of it before. I actually didn't have any idea what alcoholism was. I thought that my boyfriend at the time was just acting out and drinking because he was a jerk. I didn't realize that he was out of control. My dad had 1 beer every night and my mom drank on occasion. And I just had never seen alcoholism in my world before. I didn't know what it was. And over the years that I was with that boyfriend, I had heard him tell a lot of stories about his experience in AA. He had actually lived in a sober house for a year. He described it as the best year of his life. But when he talked about AA, it was usually just these stories that other people had shared. And he shared them almost in a way of just, reliving almost his sobriety was like his glory years. But there were always these really detailed, deep stories, and they were really interesting to listen to. And when I went to an AA meeting with Liz at one point and another friend at another point, it was just like he described, people from all walks of life sharing their riveting stories of suffering and being consumed by their addictions. Many with stories of overcoming their troubles and finally finding peace, but all of them still coming back to AA to admit that they are powerless. I loved seeing people in circle. I love group work. And I loved seeing the immense support and humanity and camaraderie that was present in those circles. But after a week, I felt like I got what I needed, and continuing to go just didn't feel like it was going to offer me anymore. But I did stay in close touch with Liz. She's one of my best friends now. And I was so grateful that we had met. And over the time that we were friends, she decided to move forward out of AA, and she'll talk about that story. But when she did decide to leave, we started discussing AA through a critical lens. And I heard similar sentiments come from Allison too. And I wanted to gather here today to hear these women out and have them share some of the concepts that we've discussed. They actually met for the first time on Zoom today. And so I'm really grateful to you guys being vulnerable enough to not only show up to share this with the Rooted Souls audience, but to meet together when you barely know each other. So thank you for trusting me, and that I feel that there is synergy here. I'd love to just open the floor. I really want this show to be mostly about you guys speaking about your experience, your wisdom, and the benefits that you receive from AA, but also the challenges and the problems that you see with the 12-step dynamic, so that we can offer the listeners a really well-rounded insight, window into the 12-step program and what other options there are out there for people struggling with these kinds of issues. Welcome.
Thanks.
Yeah, excited to be here. Thanks for having me again.
So who would like to start? Please jump in, share your view on things, share your experience. Please take the floor. Liz, why don't you go first?
Okay. I think we talked about before this episode, like maybe giving a little bit of a brief history of AA, and like what AA is, or what you do in AA or any 12-step program, really, to just give some context for people who might not know.
That would be really helpful.
Yeah. So AA was kind of the first 12-step program of recovery that was created sometime in the 30s. And like, Allison, jump in if I get anything wrong or you want to add anything. But it was created in the 30s by Bill Wilson, who's kind of the like patriarch of AA, and Dr. Bob, who was a doctor that also just helped found it. They sought help from a Christian organization. I don't think a lot of people realize that. But there was like a nun or someone who helped them to kind of create a structure and stuff within the program. So Bill Wilson was identified as an alcoholic, had a really hard time not drinking, and had been treated in different hospitals and things, and found that what helped him was gathering with other groups, with other people who had the same problem or had the same struggle. And that's sort of how meetings started. So AA meetings are groups of people who identify as alcoholics or identify that they want help not drinking anymore. And there's this sort of program that evolved, which is what the 12 steps are. Things in there like, first and foremost, admitting you're powerless, turning things over to a higher power, whether that's God or something that you define. And then things like taking a personal inventory of all the like things you've done wrong, a moral inventory of they're called character defects in AA. Sharing that with another person who's probably what's called your sponsor in AA, who's like another person who's done the 12 steps that you sort of seek for mentorship within the program. Making amends with people, continuing to like pray and meditate, and then helping others doing the same thing, whether by being a sponsor usually, or like spreading the message of AA. And that's AA in a nutshell, I think. Is there anything you want to add to that, Allison?
I was just thinking about, one of the things that I always appreciated about AA is that it's technically free. So you don't have to pay, it's not like a $30,000 28-day program in Malibu or where, or wherever. So yeah, you could just show up if you didn't even have a dime to your name, you're welcome there. And technically there's no hierarchy, which I also appreciated. There's not, and we could get into that, why I said the word technically on purpose, but technically there's not supposed to be a hierarchy. Like there's no president of AA. There's no, that kind of thing. So yeah. And then the history you gave, is perfect. I think it, initially it unfolded where the first few members were straight white men, right? And I think, maybe in the 30s, they actually didn't think women could be
Women couldn't go to meetings for like a long time.
Right. So that came later, that like, oh, maybe a woman might have a problem or maybe should be allowed to benefit. Same thing with like people of color and just all, now it is all walks of life, like Becca said, but it took a while. to get there.
Yeah, kind of analogous to just American history.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
Right.
it's like of the people, of the culture. But yeah, it is like
Yes.
sort of grassroots in that way. And there's no professionals. Like I know on TV, a lot of times people depict AA meetings as like having a person that's like an outside professional kind of facilitating the meeting, but that's actually not really the case. I don't think I've ever seen a meeting run like that. It's just run by people that are part of the meeting. And there's like elections and stuff to pick who's going to be the chairperson and like
Yes.
that kind of stuff. So it is like kind of democratic in that way. It's
Right.
kind of, yeah.
I think what stuck out to me was the level of willingness everyone had to support complete strangers. And when you're really suffering or you feel alone and there's a room of strangers offering their phone number or a hug or whatever you need, there's healing in that. And there's value in that. And I just remember that day when I was feeling so low that I ended up there, that helped in that moment.
Yeah.
But it wasn't necessarily a, healthy or sustainable source of support for me. And I think I knew that early on. But again, like I had already experienced circles and had a group of friends, and it wasn't my first experience with that, but definitely it lit something up in me that had me going back for more rapid fire, right? I went to a bunch all at once.
Yeah. Would you like us to talk about our experiences now?
Yes, please.
All right. I'm going to try to create the short narrative. It's definitely could be long, but I started going to, so we talked a lot about AA. There's 12-step programs for like probably anything that someone can feel addicted to. So Becca mentioned we met in an Al-Anon meeting. That's like what's meant for the partners or like loved ones or people who care about alcoholics. It was created by Bill Wilson's wife, and it was actually the first 12-step program that I went to. So I started going to Al-Anon in 2013, maybe. I was in a very abusive relationship at the time, and I was actually going to Al-Anon meetings with my partner's mother, my ex-partner, but which is a whole other thing. But I started in Al-Anon, and I found that like I would go there and I was pretty isolated from like everybody because it's kind of the nature of abuse. And I would go and I'd hear other people talk and I'd feel like people were nice to me and they told me they were praying for me. And I felt like really special and I felt like comforted and like somewhat safe there. I ended up meeting a woman who had also been in an abusive marriage for quite some time and had escaped and been in 12-step program, also in AA for like 30 years. And she became my sponsor and helped me escape from that relationship. And I'm still like incredibly grateful for the generosity of her and of all the other people there that helped. I ended up in AA because I had talked to my sponsor about how I used to drink in like college and high school and stuff. And, I would still like sometimes drink and sometimes felt like I was drinking more than I wanted to because like other people around me were drinking and stuff like that. And she essentially, I don't know if this was her intention. I'm trying not to put this on her or project or anything, but I got the notion in my head because she said, "Oh, you might be an alcoholic. You should be careful." And I heard that enough times. And I heard things like she told me, "Oh, well, if you've ever had a blackout, that means you're an alcoholic." And this was like from older AA literature. There used to be these like, I forgot how many questions, but there was this like list of questions and it was like, have you ever blacked out? Yes or no? And you check it off. And then it's like, well, this might mean you're an alcoholic. So I was talking about this experience of, having blacked out in college and like that kind of stuff. And she mentioned that I might be an alcoholic, and I went to an AA meeting, and I could relate to some of the stuff people talked to me about, or were talking about, like how they drank. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm an alcoholic, and I'll continue going to AA. And I continue to go to AA for like 3 more years. And I felt again, like I made these connections with people. I learned how to be vulnerable and speak honestly and have people like receive me and talk about like my childhood trauma and all this stuff, and have most people respond well. And I felt really safe and protected. And I got this like list of things I could do, and this like narrative about like what all this stuff in my past must have meant, because now I'm an alcoholic and this makes sense. And I like really bought into all of it. And the benefits I got like really good at opening up to people. I developed a lot more empathy for other people and understanding. I made a lot of friends who I still have a handful of after leaving AA. Got much better at public speaking, but I found that I was exaggerating my drinking to fit in. And I found that every time I was like, am I really an alcoholic? The response I would get is, that's your disease talking. And I was not allowed to question that. And I was, no one tells you, everyone says like, these are suggestions, and you don't have to believe in God, or you don't have to, you can choose any higher power, just can't be yourself. But I still felt this sort of like pressure to conform to all these things. And like one of my first meetings I went to, someone asked me, oh, what step are you on? And I was like, 1. Like, oh, but you'll be on step 2 soon. And it was like this sort of like race. And then it became this like pressure to have sponsees, and like a pressure to act a certain way and have a certain narrative. And it became very like, I noticed a lot of like groupthink, and what felt like this thing I could latch onto after some time felt like this thing that I didn't align with and I wasn't sure about anymore, but I couldn't question. And my entire support network really, for the most part, was in these rooms. And we get messaging like, if you go back out, you're destined to drink. If you leave AA, you're going to drink, and you're going to end up in jail, in an institution, or dead. And they'd say, oh, well, like people go back out and we never see them again. And I'd hear like my sponsor talking about people who left AA in this sort of like with a very critical tone and like almost a shameful tone. And I got the sense that like I could not leave no matter what. And so anytime that question, like, am I really an alcoholic, came up, I was like, absolutely, I'm like not thinking about this, because the alternative is terrible. Like the other side of this question is catastrophic. Mm. And that question kept coming up like routinely for years. And at some point I got to the point where I was like, okay, I've also been in therapy and like kind of healed some of this stuff, where I felt like I got to a point where I could trust myself and trust my intuition and trust that if something kept coming up, it's worth paying attention to. Mm-hmm. And I started paying attention to it, and I started doing more research and talking to some people, finding people who had left AA and hearing their experience, and that it wasn't always bad. And also, honestly, talking to my sponsor at the time about it and having her really, and this I think came from a place of like care and protection, but like really judge me for having the question. And then feeling like, okay, I can't necessarily talk to people who have been in AA for 35 years about leaving AA, because what they've been told is what I've heard. And I got to a point where I did enough, research and like weighing my options and talking to like multiple therapists and feeling like, okay, I've gotten to a place where like I do trust myself and I value myself and I take care of myself. And a lot of that was because I was in 12-step programs and I like learned how to do some of that. And it just got to the point where I would sit in meetings and listen to like this disease perspective, and like you have to like talk about your character defects all the time, and like all of the like more religious talk. And I'd have to translate the meetings in my head to make sense with my own beliefs and like what I intuitively felt. And there were other things I was doing outside of AA that felt better. And I eventually left, and I drink now, but I don't drink out of control. I don't drink in response to like hard feelings. Like I know how to handle those things. And I'm not in jail, and I'm not in an institution, and I'm not dead. So I was told AA was the only way, and AA is really great for people, and it like really gave me a like a community, and I still miss having a community like that, and I've had to work harder to build that for myself. But it's not the only way, and I just want to put that out there and let Allison talk.
Thank you, Liz.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. Yeah. I appreciate getting to know you and your story more. Yeah, and I can relate to a lot of those things. So let's see. The first 12-step program that I went to was also Al-Anon. In 2003. I was in college. I was going to the counseling center, like in the college. And the person I was seeing there suggested Al-Anon. And there's a lot of alcoholism in my family and chaos and whatever. So I went to Al-Anon for probably about a year. And I had sort of a realization in Al-Anon that I also had a problem with alcohol. Maybe the one caveat where Liz and I have different stories is that I just don't think alcohol is good for me ever under any circumstances. So I am quote unquote sober still from alcohol. Just because for me it is like a poison. But I microdose mushrooms. I have medicinally used marijuana. Have I done anything else in my sobriety? Mushrooms, cannabis. Theoretically, that's it. But it's like I'll drink kava tea. I'll have kombucha, trace amount of alcohol. Some people in AA would be like, no, you can never cook with alcohol. You cannot, whatever. So some people would say I'm not sober, right? Like some people would look at me now because I've smoked pot medicinally, because I've microdosed with mushrooms. They would say, no, she's not sober. I don't care. I feel like I'm sober. To me, I'm sober, whatever. I have not had a cigarette since 2006. So that's nice too. But I have smoked hookah and I have smoked cigars, not regularly, but occasionally, every once in a while I have. So, in 2004, I went to my first AA meeting, and I haven't had alcohol since that time. Do I think there are a lot of great things about AA? Sure. For some of the reasons that Liz mentioned. Being in a room with other people that have had a similar struggle was very comforting. It was like, okay, wow, I'm not the only one. I'm not crazy. I really, what was the crux for me was I just could not understand why I couldn't control who I was going to be while under the influence of alcohol. I just I couldn't understand that. It was a roll of the dice. I didn't know who I was going to be while intoxicated, didn't know what I was going to do. For me, the blackout thing was all the time. So it wasn't just like, oh, I blacked out once in college. It was like, no, I blacked out for like 4 years, you know? And so finally for me, it was such a relief to sort of think, maybe I just don't have to do this anymore. Like maybe I just don't have to keep trying to control it. Maybe I could just let it go, you know? And so that was kind of like a massive turning point for me. And the one of the other things I really appreciated about AA and the 12 steps was that I really thought that when it came to the concept of God, that you only had 3 choices: Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, basically. And so it was sort of like, God is religion, religion is God. You can pick one of these avenues and that's it. There's no other way. So when I heard in AA that actually God could be whatever you want it to be, it could be like a freaking light bulb or something, or it could, you know, it could be the sunset or whatever, that really resonated with me, because in college, I had been studying philosophy. Turns out Liz also studied philosophy. Part of what the allure for me with philosophy was this question of like, is God real? You know, like, is there a God? Like, you know, that's really what I was kind of like into trying to figure out. So finally, it was sort of like almost like it gave me permission to just come up with my own brand of spirituality, and that has stuck, you know, and continued to evolve, you know, over the years. But so I'm grateful for that. I definitely really am, you know, was blown away by the level in which some people would bend over backwards to help you with seemingly no strings attached. I hadn't really experienced that in my life in any other setting. So that, you know, that was always like, wow. And I would say for the first 5 years, I went to a meeting every day. Like, it was definitely my life. You know, I met some great people there. I met some not so great people there. You know, I think AA is just sort of a, you know, a microcosm of the macro, right? There's going to be the best of humanity there. There's going to be the worst of humanity there, and everything in between. And then, you know, probably between years 5 and 10, I went maybe 4 times a week. Like, it was still very much a regular thing. And then after the sort of 10-year mark, between maybe years 10 and 14, it was a very slow dwindling down for me until I finally kind of stopped going in roughly 2018-ish. So why did I stop going? You know, it's like, what should I say first? I mean, you know, on the one hand, I acknowledge the importance of sort of upholding tradition and history and things like that. But here we are in the 2000s, you know, reading a book from the 1930s written by straight white men with a Judeo-Christian overtone and influence. And it was sort of like, there will never be any edits. You know, we're never, you know, we it's like, this is enshrined forever. Like, nobody can tweak this. Nobody can have a different opinion, even though there are some blatantly offensive things in the literature. We just have to suck it up. You know, you just have to ignore it and move on, you know, take what you like, leave the rest, whatever. And, you know, to me, it's kind of like, right. So just because like Confederate statues have a historical significance, like, do we leave those up, you know, to kind of bring in like a, you know, sort of modern thing that has been an issue, right, over the last few years. So, you know, I read every piece of AA literature probably at least 100 times each. And, so on the one hand, it was just sort of the sheer boredom that I finally felt at like 10 years in, 12 years in, 14 years in. Like, I just don't know how many more times I can hear the same chapter called Two Wives, like, yeah, and it was like everybody, the groupthink that Liz, touched upon. It's like, after a while, it just was like everybody's just paraphrasing stuff that they read in the big book. It's not even necessarily their own genuine experience. It's just sort of like regurgitating, like lines from the literature, and kind of telling the same story like over and over and over and over and over again. I also felt like there was a lot of judgment. Right, like there would be lines like, we don't have a monopoly on God, but right, if you're not in the center of AA, you're going to get picked off and you're going to die. And the same thing that Liz said, that people who stop going to meetings, like, we never hear from them again, implying something tragic happened. And it's like, well, you never hear from them again because they stopped going. It doesn't mean anything necessarily like bad about what's going on in their life now. And it did feel like it was sort of this competition of like, who's been through the steps the most times, and like how many, who has the most sponsees, and that, like, I shared this with Becca and Liz briefly before this podcast, that as somebody who's been trying to recover from a lifetime of people pleasing, over giving, burning myself out, not putting myself first, hearing a message over and over that I'm selfish, self-centered, a liar, a cheater, like thief, that I've been taking all my life. So now I have to give back, meaning I have to give back by having service positions in AA. I have to give back by sponsoring people in AA because somebody did it for me. So now I have to do it. And that really screwed with my mind, because it was like, I always felt like I wasn't doing enough. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't helping enough. And to even contemplate like not going anymore was like, you're a pariah, or like it's the unthinkable, and and I also felt like people kind of love to tell you what to do. And so I felt like that happened a lot, and like unsolicited advice type stuff. I remember moving from, I think I had been living in like Brighton, Massachusetts, and I moved to Quincy. So I was like, I'm definitely not going to be going to AA meetings all the way up in Brighton anymore when I live down in Quincy. So I started to try to check out some other meetings. And I just remember immediately this guy was on me that if I didn't get a home group right away, I was gonna leave. I was gonna go out, meaning like drink again, and like, I was like, excuse me, sir. Like at that point, it's like, I had been sober 10 years, which whatever, but it's like, I'm an adult. I've been sober 10 years. I've been in therapy since I was like 17, like I'm okay. Like, I don't need you as a stranger to be on me, telling me what I must do next. And I guess the one other thing I'll say that I shared with Liz and Becca was that, there's a sort of a big premise in the program about, like humility and figuring out what that means, and being quote unquote right sized. And that a lot of so-called alcoholics have a ego, what is it, like an ego something inferiority complex, like an ego mania and whatever. And so I felt like a lot of AA is meant to be ego deflating. And I feel like for people that might be a minority or a woman or any kind of oppressed group, it's like that further ego deflation actually was detrimental and didn't help. And it was like, oh, and now you're powerless. We've been freaking powerless our whole lives, you know? And now now you're totally telling me that I'm completely not nothing, but like completely powerless. And it's like, actually, I feel like we're quite powerful. And that's a whole thing that maybe we could get into later. But that's why, by the time I was like 14 years in, I just was feeling like, I don't know if this is like working for me anymore. But I was so afraid of what people were going to think. I was so afraid of being judged. I was so afraid of being like, that bad girl who just took from AA and then she left, but finally by, 2018-ish, I just hadn't gone for a while. And it was kind of like, the movie Office Space, if you guys have seen that. You have to watch Office Space. But in Office Space, he has stopped going to work. And I think it was his friend who says, "Are you going to quit?" And he goes, "Nah, I'm just not going to go anymore." And that's kind of what it was like for me. Like, I wasn't like, and I'm done. I didn't like make this big, people that are leaving Facebook, like, I'm leaving, like, I hate it on here. And they have to like announce it. And it's like, okay, like you made this grand exit. It wasn't like that for me. It was just kind of I don't think I want to go anymore. And then it was like, I haven't been in a while. It was like, yeah, I haven't been in a while. And I haven't been in an even longer while now. And now it's 2022. So, yeah.
Liz had touched on something, and thank you, Allison, for all of that. Liz touched on something early on about that when she drinks, it's not to self-soothe. It's not to mask any hard feelings. And you had mentioned, I think what I used to hear my ex-boyfriend say was, it's not a drinking problem, it's an ego problem. Was that the phrase?
Probably.
But
something like that.
and I was an extreme pothead through high school and dabbled off and on in college. I was never drawn to alcohol. In college, I was around a lot of breweries and like microbreweries and stuff. So I used to drink beer because I liked the taste and things. And then I ended up, joining the food cult and, went through food sensitivity elimination diets and stuff. So I had to cut out the beer, and then that was less fun to drink. But I would drink when partying, but it was never like a compulsion. It was more like a celebration. And I found in high school, when I would smoke pot, it was to escape. It felt like a rebellion. So it was never what I would call an addiction. Not that I don't have addictions in life, but definitely not with pot and drinking. And it wasn't until I was in this relationship, seeing him struggle with alcohol and feel so guilty about it, and then us go out to eat, and I wouldn't drink around him. And so I just kind of stopped drinking, and see how the waiters would push it on us and not take no for an answer, and see how it was just everywhere. It started to dawn on me how much pressure was in our culture to drink. Yeah. And I chose sobriety because I was supporting him, but then I started being disgusted with the culture of alcohol. And as a health coach at the time, I saw it as a poison, because like I would drink it and feel sick to my stomach, or I didn't feel right the next day. I'd feel depressed even. And because I was drinking so infrequently, it was so dramatic, the difference. And so I've been sober for years. I don't know when, because just like you slipped away, I just not interested in drinking anymore. So I didn't declare I'm a sober person, but I haven't had a drink in years. And still people will ask why, or I've heard other people say, I wish I could do that too. And I'm just aware of the discomfort people have of being different from the group, whether they're trying to stay sober or they're trying to be a normal person who drinks, in quotes.
Yeah. Right.
And so it seems like in our culture, you can't win. Like you're either, you know, like you should be drinking if you're not an alcoholic. If you're not in the program, you should be drinking. And if you are in the program, you shouldn't be drinking. And so, you know, I can't help but think, you know, as a spiritual life coach, how important the spirituality of self is, and the ability to self-soothe, whether you're going to drink or not. You've got to find a way to handle the hard emotions. Alcohol cannot be the comfort, and it can't be the thing that you're avoiding at all lengths, because if you drink it, then you're going to have the hard issues, right? Like we have to get down to the root. What is causing this relationship to alcohol, whether it's gotta keep drinking it or gotta stay away from it. And I think, you know, there's such a deep conversation there about like what it represents for the sober person or for the person without a quote unquote drinking problem.
I feel compelled. I have to talk about this. When I've reflected on like my drinking throughout my whole drinking career, a lot of it, when it was like more than I wanted it to be, was to fit in, because people around me were doing it, because it was like the culture of being in college was like, you drink a lot and you like do keg stands and you chug things and whatever. And I continued to do that. And then I did it in AA. Like I just wanted to fit in and be part of the group. So I started talking like the group and exaggerating things like the group, and like, yeah. And I got to a point where like, that's not what I wanted to do anymore. And I still do it like with other things, but I notice it now. And I also know that a lot of like, it took me a long time to like make the decision to just like try to drink again. And it felt like something I needed to do to like, just like to prove to myself that I could. And after like getting this messaging and being so embedded in this group that was telling me all of these horrible things, I had to like deprogram that way. And I had like a sip of wine one night and like nothing happened. I was like, okay. And I remember talking to my therapist at the time, and he told me, he was like, it's a risk if you drink. Like, I'm not going to deny that. But if that's something you feel like you need to do, just don't do it when you're sad or stressed out. Beautiful. And that became like my rule. And every time I would like think I wanted to drink, I would like ask myself why. I'd ask what was going on in my life. And I like kind of taught myself to moderate in that way. And sometimes I drank too much and I felt terrible the next day. And I was like, oh, I don't think I want to do that again. And like, there is a point where like, I know there's people who can't necessarily make that choice or feel that they more powerless over that choice. But I think I really learned a lot about myself in stepping away from like using external coping mechanisms, right? Like alcohol or, you know, other things. I also like was in eating disorder recovery for a long time and in therapy and like dealing with trauma and like all that stuff. So I learned a lot about myself, and I got to the point where I could like trust my body and like make better choices about that and like regain that choice that I was told I didn't have because of some like biological flaw. Because AA really pushes the disease model and this like allergy to alcohol, that like alcoholics are allergic to alcohol, and it's like scientifically disproven and still like preached as fact. And there's so much about like even the term alcohol, and one thing that came up for me when you were talking just now, Becca, is like this idea of like black or white thinking, which is something we're like taught not to do in AA. Like they do talk about it, but like
the irony,
AA is black and white. It's like you're an alcoholic or you're not. Like once you're pickled, you're never a cucumber. Like and like actually, and like as someone now who's like talked to multiple therapists about this and like studies mental health and like has read the DSM a lot, like alcoholism isn't in there. And there's a whole thing with like the system of the DSM-5 that's like a problem. But like, if we think about like the view on substance abuse disorder, like many other things, is it's a spectrum, and you can like fall anywhere on the spectrum at any time. And it doesn't mean that like if you were on one end of the spectrum, you can never go back. It's like you actually like as a human are resilient, because like that's what humans are, and like can learn to make better choices. And sometimes like that choice is not to drink anymore, like ever. Like Allison has made that choice, and I don't know you very well, but it seems like that's what you feel the right choice is, right? And like that might be true. And for me, that wasn't the choice. But it felt like AA took that choice away from me.
Wow.
And as someone who was coming from an abusive relationship where like so much was taken from me, and like I felt so disempowered, and tried so hard to like reclaim myself and empower myself after being in AA for and another 12-step programs for so long, it felt like I had to work harder to do that and stay in the program.
Totally. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like what you said about it being a spectrum, because I think that that is true. And I also think that the prevalence of like mental illness and how that intersects with using substances is like a huge deal. And like, you know, could be the reason why somebody quote unquote seems like an alcoholic, because maybe they have undiagnosed something, you know, or they haven't dealt with this or got the help that they need for that, you know. And so I do think, to me personally, I think that there's a real truth in the concept of self-medicating with a substance. And I also, I feel conflicted about the disease model. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, I do think we are choosing. Like, I actually think people are a little bit more powerful than we might be giving ourselves credit for, or them credit for. I do think it's a choice. I think that when you're 7 drinks in, or like 10 shots in, then maybe the 11th is no longer a choice, because like the substance is really taken over. But before that, you know, I don't know. I guess I think it is a choice. And so, you know, I actually can't say with 100% certainty that I'll never drink again. There might come a point in time where I feel the same way as Liz. And it's like, you know what? I was 21 when I got sober, and now I'm 39. And it's like, maybe it was a phase, maybe it was college, maybe it was this, maybe it was that, you know, and maybe there'll be a point where I test the waters, I guess. Where was I going to go with that? I was going to go somewhere.
If it's a disease or choice.
Right. But yeah, it's like in AA, like you can't even talk like that. Yeah, like you really can't say stuff like that. And yeah, and so I actually have been, you know, it's been kind of refreshing and nice to see over the years things pop up, like this whole like sober curious movement, and people that are kind of into it, you know, into like exploring sobriety, but not because, you know, not necessarily through AA, right? Or like there's a group called She Recovers. I don't know like a ton about it. I haven't really been involved, but you know, yeah, it's been nice to see that, okay, that, you know what, there could be some other like alternatives here. Yeah, I feel like I was gonna say something, make some other point, which has escaped me at this moment, but
Well,
have you either of you read the book Quit Like a Woman?
I've heard of it. I
Oh.
haven't read it. I've heard great things about it.
So good. Holly Whitaker, I believe, is the author. Quit Like a Woman. Amazing. And she echoes a lot of the things, sentiments about AA that we've discussed in here.
Obviously the circle of us, like we're on the spectrum, right? Like I didn't have I didn't have a drinking problem. Now I'm sober, but that was purely through lifestyle choice and spirit. For me, I like to just stay as present as possible. And for me, drinking is the opposite of being present. That's my personal experience. And then, Liz shared about, being kind of inundated with the message that she is an alcoholic, and then being able to kind of tease out what her truth is. And you have a very different story as well. I have coached people on the spectrum as well, from different cultures. So, different cultures like Ireland, the UK, like pub life is part of their culture. For me, I see like rites of passage in the US. It's like you start drinking as you enter adulthood, and it becomes this part of being part of the community, part of the machine of restaurant culture and music culture and sports culture. It's all just so tied in. And as a sober person who can't claim alcoholism as my drive, people get very confused about that. It has become more common these days, but it's very strange for people. And it is this black and white thing. You're a drinker, you're not a drinker. And, as we look at people on the spectrum, there's this common story of trauma and nervous system dysregulation and lack of awareness of self and feeling lost. And, I think that a lot of people get ushered into AA as the only option to get sober. And I think I'd love our listeners to leave today with some options of, if they are struggling with this, or they know somebody that's struggling with what looks like alcoholism or addiction, what are other solutions? What are other opportunities? And, we talked about therapy being a consistent theme, nervous system regulation. I'd love to hear what you feel like might be in these books and some other communities. What are some other options? And of course, if people are thriving in AA or feel connected and steeped in it, and maybe feel a little defensive and like, they don't want to walk away. We're not saying you have to leave AA, but I'd love to tie it up with just some more holistic perspectives and support suggestions for people.
Yeah, I also want to say, and I wish I had said this earlier, that like all of this is my own experience, and I'm not talking as a professional or anything. This is just what I experienced. Other people have different experiences. Other people have similar experiences. I just happen to be in the group of people that experienced wanting to leave AA and did. One thing I did was I read a book called The Freedom Model, which was written by a group of some kind of scientists, like psychologists, like that. I don't know exactly, but there was lots of scientific literature in there, kind of like debunking a lot of stuff that AA kind of pushes as true about alcohol and drinking and alcoholics and things. And that helped me feel like it was okay to leave and that I had other options. There are other like tangible options. Like there's other groups called like smart recovery, which is also like an abstinence-based program. But I think I don't know too much about it, but I think it's more based in science than AA is. Moderation management is a group that like helps people to moderate their drinking. There's like some controversy about it, but I know it exists. Therapy is great. Go to therapy no matter who you are.
I think in any group, right? I think Allison said early on, like it's a macrocosm. Like any group, there's going to be people on one end of it or not. So I don't know of a group that has any consistency of
and
anything.
I do think like a lot of things that I've heard and I think is true for my own experience is like, especially like in AA, like the people can be the problem. Like there are people in AA who will say like, you can't be on an antidepressant because it's a drug.
Correct.
And like, that's an issue. But not everywhere does that. So like, there are some more extreme groups than others that like may be more damaging. And there's some like really amazing people that I've met in AA that I'm still friends with. So I don't know, help me, I get us some kind of support, like with really valuable people. Like that's what I think. And there are groups of people that like in the smart recovery or others that may struggle with the same thing. But that was the biggest thing for me, was having a community and like finding my people.
Yeah, and all of those things are great, like suggestions or other alternatives that someone could check out. I mean, I think to add to that, you know, something that could be helpful, or these things have definitely helped me, but is literally just yoga, meditation. I've taken some like personal growth and development type programs and retreats like that. All of, like, to me, all of that has like aided feeling like I'm a quote unquote healthy, like more or less thriving individual in life. Definitely therapy of whatever kind. I think somatic experiencing is great. Even like working with a coach could be something, you know, that helps somebody. Because at the end of the day, I think if you think you have a problem with alcohol or any other substance or whatever, it's not even about the substance. It's about what's going on underneath, right? And so it's like what's going on underneath could be addressed in a wide variety of ways. And I really think that, yeah, it's like each person's path is unique. So you do have to find what works for you. And that's a great thing. That's a beautiful thing. And I just think, I guess the only other thing I would say is like, although there are many things that I do think were helpful about AA, it's like when you get a room of 100 people who have most likely been through some major trauma in their lives, and nobody is a professional, like nobody is sort of like a skilled professional at like navigating all of this, it is kind of a recipe for maybe causing further harm, you know, like how could it not? And then the prevalence, you know, we joke about what the 13th step is. You know, the 13th step is like someone who's trying to get with you, you know, because everyone comes in a very vulnerable place, right? You're broken, you're looking for answers, you're looking for help. And sometimes you feel like you're going to get it through the apparent, you know, admiration and like love of someone who's trying to get it on with you. With you. And so, you know, it's just again, that's why it is a mixed bag. It's just, there's going to be a little bit of everything. And I think if you're someone who's coming in with a lot of trauma, it's like if you're only doing AA, that scares me, I would say. Yeah. So
I think the bottom line is that getting together and chanting "We are powerless" is going to perpetuate powerlessness. And so I think the takeaway message is you do have power, you do have choice. Get a support system and people around you who believe in you, who believe in your ability to heal and regulate and thrive, and choose things that support that narrative.
yeah.
Thank you so much for coming with me today to create this episode. I hope that this was helpful for you listening. If this episode can benefit anyone that you know, please share it. If you have any comments or would like to give us some feedback, you can reach me through my website. I will attach the recommendations that you and I mentioned in the show notes. And until next time, thank you so much, ladies. It was such a pleasure to meet with you today.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Becca.
Bye.
Yay, awesome.